She called the cops on my own ranch, said I was trespassing after 6 months coordinating military operations in Israel. I pulled into my gravel driveway at 0800 hours to find Karen broadcasting live to her 17 followers while 3 patrol cars blocked my garage. Still in my travel gear, dust from Ben Gurion Airport on my boots, I just wanted to check my cattle and get some American coffee. Instead, I'm standing with hands visible while officers verify I'm not some foreign infiltrator on my own land. Before you watch complete story, comment down from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe. Karen's waving a manila folder like she's presenting evidence to the Supreme Court, screaming into her phone about unauthorized military vehicles and suspicious Middle Eastern connections. She had no clue she just picked a fight with the Air Force colonel who controls every square mile of airspace above her precious HOA. Quick question for anyone watching this unfold: ever have a neighbor completely lose their mind while you were serving your country overseas? Drop your stories below because this gets so much worse. Officer Martinez was the first to approach my truck, and I could see the exhaustion in his eyes before he even spoke. "Sir, we've received reports that you're operating some kind of unauthorized military facility on residential property," he said, though his tone suggested he'd rather be dealing with actual criminals. Karen rushed over, clutching her folder like it contained nuclear launch codes. "Officers, this man has been gone for 6 months. According to HOA Bylaws Section 47C, any property abandoned for more than 90 days falls under emergency community management." She pulled out what looked like a deed with her name typed over mine, though even from 20 feet away I could see the obvious Microsoft Word font mismatch. The backup officers were now gathering around, and I heard radio chatter about another Powell situation, which told me this wasn't Karen's first rodeo with false emergency calls. I stepped out of my truck slowly, hands visible, because the last thing I needed after 6 months of coordinating joint military operations was to escalate suburban theater. "Officers, I'm Colonel Marcus Reed. I own this ranch and I've been on classified deployment in Israel working with Allied Air Forces," I explained, pulling out my military ID and ranch deed. "Been gone exactly 183 days on official government business." Karen immediately zoomed her phone camera on my face, providing live commentary to her audience. "Look at those eyes, classic con artist bone structure. You can see the deception. And notice how he claims classified operations to avoid questions." The live comments were already rolling in on her phone screen. "Lady, you're nuts. That's obviously his property. Someone call this woman a therapist." But Karen was too deep in her performance to notice. My neighbor Elena, a retired teacher who'd been collecting my mail for 6 months, must have heard the commotion because she came hurrying over with my spare keys jingling in her hand. "Dios mío, what is this nonsense?" Elena exclaimed, her voice thick with indignation. "I've been feeding his horses for 6 months, Karen. You know this is his ranch. You've been sending him violation notices the whole time he was gone." Karen's face twitched, but she recovered quickly, spinning toward her camera. "See how they conspire together? This elderly woman has clearly been manipulated by this military imposter." Elena muttered something in Spanish that definitely wasn't suitable for Karen's family-friendly livestream. Officer Martinez was examining my identification, comparing it to property records on his tablet, while Karen kept insisting everything about me was fabricated. "Of course his ID looks legitimate, that's what makes him dangerous. He's a professional fraud, probably working for foreign governments." The situation was so absurd I almost laughed, but jet lag was winning over amusement. Here I was, still wearing desert boots and smelling like military transport planes, unable to enter my own home without dealing with this suburban circus. Martinez handed back my ID with an apologetic expression. "Sir, everything checks out. You're free to access your property." But Karen wasn't finished. She never was. She pulled out a thick stack of papers from her folder, holding them up triumphantly. "Wait. I have proof he's impersonating a military officer. This whole identity is fake. I've done extensive research." The officers exchanged looks that clearly said they'd rather be dealing with actual emergencies, but Martinez, ever the professional, took the folder with all the enthusiasm of someone about to get a root canal. Inside were printouts from various conspiracy websites about fake military personnel mixed with blurry photos of me that she'd apparently taken over the past few months. One article was highlighted titled, "How to Spot a Military Imposter," and Karen had written Marcus in red marker next to every bullet point. There were also screenshots of my LinkedIn profile with questions like, "Why would a real colonel live on a ranch?" scribbled in the margins. The second officer, a younger guy who looked fresh out of the academy, was trying not to laugh as he flipped through pages that included a zoomed-in photo of my Air Force parking permit with, obviously counterfeit, written across it in Karen's handwriting. "Ma'am," Martinez said slowly like he was explaining something to a child, "these are interesting theories, but Colonel Reed has provided valid military identification, and we've verified his property ownership. There's no crime here." Karen's eyes went wild and she spun back to her camera. "You see? They're all in on it. The corruption goes all the way to the local police. But I won't stop fighting for this community." She then looked directly at me, and I saw something in her eyes that went beyond typical HOA power trips. This was personal somehow. "You might have fooled them," she said, her voice dropping to a strange whisper, "but I know what you really are. And I have proof. Real proof." She clutched her phone like a weapon, and I realized this was far from over. In fact, if I knew Karen, and after 18 months of escalating HOA harassment while I was stationed stateside, I unfortunately did, this was just the opening move. What kind of real proof do you think Karen had? Drop your wildest theories below. I guarantee her actual evidence was more unhinged than anything you can imagine. By day 2, I had 127 emails in my inbox, each one more deranged than the last. Let me share some highlights from Karen's digital assault collection. Email number 12 complained about unauthorized aircraft noise patterns over my ranch, suggesting I was operating an illegal military airfield. Email number 34 reported suspicious antenna arrays on my property. She was referring to my TV satellite dish. Email number 67 warned about unusual vehicle exhaust signatures indicating possible chemical weapons production. I'd been changing the oil in my truck. But my personal favorite was email number 89, which accused me of using advanced military technology to artificially enhance grass growth, creating an unfair advantage in neighborhood lawn competitions. Apparently, my 6 months of Elena watering the lawn had resulted in what Karen considered suspiciously green grass patterns inconsistent with natural precipitation cycles. I sat at my kitchen table, coffee growing cold, scrolling through this digital avalanche of paranoia while wondering how someone could have this much free time and choose to spend it documenting the conspiracy theories about their neighbor's lawn care. Karen wasn't content with just emails though. She'd built herself a multimedia empire dedicated to exposing my supposed military fraud. She'd created a website called StopTheFakeColonel.com, complete with Comic Sans font and auto-playing patriotic music that assaulted your ears the moment the page loaded. The site featured a photo of me in uniform that she'd somehow obtained, edited to look like a wanted poster with "Danger, Military Imposter" in bold red letters across the top. She'd also started a YouTube channel called Karen's Patriots Watch, that had 43 subscribers, though I suspected most were fake accounts she'd created herself. Her latest video was a PowerPoint presentation titled Military Deception, a comprehensive analysis that ran for 156 slides. I tried to watch it for intelligence purposes but gave up around slide 78 when she started analyzing the suspicious precision of how I parked my truck in my own driveway. The digital harassment was manageable, but what crossed every line was when she decided to physically invade my property. I woke up on day 3 to find 47 wooden stakes driven into my land, each marked with Federal Investigation Zone in permanent marker. They extended 30 feet past my actual property line, essentially claiming a chunk of my pasture as some kind of government seizure area. I watched from my window as Karen directed her husband Bob in placing the stakes, and I could see the poor man was sweating bullets despite the cool morning air. He kept glancing nervously at my house, and at one point I heard him mutter, "This is worse than the casino incident, Carol," before Karen cut him off with a sharp, "We don't mention gambling, Robert." I filed that interesting tidbit away for later consideration. I decided to handle this professionally, drafting a formal cease and desist letter that I sent via certified mail. I kept the language clean and legal, simply stating that she needed to remove the stakes and stop harassing me, or I'd be forced to take legal action. Karen's response came 2 hours later in the form of a live video on her social media. She held up my letter to the camera, declared fake legal threats from fake colonels mean nothing, and then proceeded to burn it in her backyard fire pit while her 18 viewers posted angry face emojis. "Like and share if you stand against military fraud," she shouted at her phone while my legal document turned to ash. I had to admit, the woman was committed to her delusion. That evening, Elena caught me by the fence while I was removing the illegal stakes. She looked around conspiratorially before leaning in close. "Mijo, you need to know something about that woman's family," she whispered, her voice heavy with the weight of old secrets. "Su familia, they have problems. Gambling problems. Very bad. She pulled out an old newspaper clipping from her pocket, yellowed with age but still readable. The headline read, "Local rancher loses everything in historic poker game," and the grainy photo showed a man who looked remarkably like Karen, her grandfather. He lost 500 acres to Carl Henderson in 1952, Elena explained. But he told the family it was the government who took it. You understand? Lies to cover shame. I studied the clipping, pieces of a larger puzzle starting to form in my mind. Elena patted my arm before heading back to her house. Maybe you need this information when she pushes too far. The next morning, I carefully documented each stake location with photos and GPS coordinates before removing them from my property. I stacked them neatly by the curb on public land, making sure everything was done legally and by the book. I was placing the last stake in the pile when I heard Karen's voice, deadly calm, speaking into her phone. 911? Yes, the fake colonel is destroying federal evidence. And I should mention, yesterday I observed him moving what appeared to be military weapons into his barn. Multiple long cases, possibly containing automatic rifles or anti-aircraft equipment. I turned to look at my barn, which contained exactly one tractor, hay bales, and the fishing poles I'd been meaning to organize since before my deployment. Ma'am, we're dispatching multiple units. Do not approach the subject. The dispatcher's voice crackled through her phone speaker. Karen smiled at me through her window and mouthed one word, checkmate. I stood there among the pile of ridiculous stakes, covered in morning dew and wondering if it was too late to request reassignment to Antarctica. At least penguins didn't file false police reports about your agricultural equipment. I could hear sirens in the distance, growing louder, and I knew my peaceful Saturday was about to become a federal case, literally. I pulled out my phone to start recording because if Karen wanted to play the documentation game, I was going to make sure I had my own evidence of what was about to happen. The sirens were getting closer now, and I could see Karen setting up her tripod again, adjusting her ring light for optimal footage of my supposed arrest. This woman really thought she was producing some kind of documentary exposé, and apparently I was her star villain. How many SWAT officers does it take to investigate a barn full of fishing equipment? Take a guess in the comments. Closest answer gets a response from me. And yes, she really thought my tackle box contained military explosives. 7 police cars and a tactical unit rolled up to my ranch like they were responding to a terrorist compound. All because Karen had reported that I was stockpiling military weapons in a barn that any reasonable person could see contained farming equipment. She was already in position, narrating breathlessly to her phone, "The takedown is imminent. Military fraud meets local justice. This is bigger than Watergate." There was even a news helicopter circling overhead, though I later learned it was just covering traffic and had nothing to do with our situation. But Karen claimed credit for it anyway, telling her viewers she'd attracted national media attention to this critical story. I stood in my driveway with my hands visible, still holding the wrench I'd been using to fix my irrigation system, trying to look as non-threatening as possible while surrounded by enough firepower to invade a small country. The SWAT team approached my barn with weapons drawn, and I had to bite my tongue to keep from laughing at the absurdity of tactical officers preparing to breach a structure that contained my grandfather's old hay baler and a collection of rusted horseshoes. "Clear the area. We're going in," the team leader announced, and I watched as 8 highly trained officers surrounded my 20 by 30 barn like it was a cartel stronghold. Karen was providing color commentary for her viewers. "You can see the fear in his eyes. He knows his weapons cache is about to be discovered." The first officer yanked open the barn door, weapon at the ready, then paused. There was a long moment of silence before I heard him key his radio. "Command, we've got a tractor." "Repeat, subject has a tractor." Another officer chimed in, also confirming one hay baler appears to be from the 1970s. A third added, "Multiple fishing rods and what looks like a tackle box containing fishing lures." Karen wasn't deterred by reality. "Check for hidden compartments. These military fraudsters are crafty," she shouted, causing several officers to exchange looks that clearly said they were reconsidering their career choices. After 30 minutes of searching that turned up nothing more dangerous than a rusty pitchfork, Officer Martinez approached me with the kind of exhausted expression I'd only seen on parents of toddlers and DMV employees. "Sir, we found no weapons." "Again. May I see your military credentials?" I reached slowly for my wallet, very aware that everyone was still on edge, and pulled out my Air Force ID and my classified operations badge. "I'm Colonel Marcus Reed, United States Air Force," I explained calmly. "I control military airspace operations for the Western District." I've been stationed in Israel for 6 months working on classified joint operations with Allied forces. I handed over my credentials and Martinez examined them carefully while Karen craned her neck to see, her phone still recording everything. Fake. Carol screeched the moment she glimpsed my badge. I researched this extensively. Look. She whipped out her phone and showed everyone her Google search for Air Force ranks, which naturally returned a Wikipedia page about military hierarchy. See? Colonels don't live on ranches. They live on bases. This is obviously a counterfeit badge from Amazon. She actually tried to grab my credentials from Martinez, declaring she needed to test if it's real metal or just plastic from a costume shop. Martinez held the badge out of her reach while calling in for verification, and we all stood there in this surreal tableau, SWAT officers slowly packing up their gear, news helicopters still circling, Karen live streaming, and me in my ranch clothes just wanting to check on my cattle. The verification process took about 15 minutes, during which Karen provided running commentary about deep state conspiracies and how they're all in on it. When the confirmation finally came through that I was indeed a full colonel with level 6 security clearance and operational control over regional military airspace, Karen's face went through several stages of denial. That's exactly what a sophisticated fraudster would arrange fake confirmation from fake officials, she declared. Martinez looked like he was aging a year for every minute he spent dealing with this situation. Ma'am, we verified Colonel Reed's identity with multiple federal databases. He is exactly who he says he is. But Karen had already moved on to her next theory, then he's a corrupt military officer, probably selling classified information. Have you checked his offshore bank accounts? It was at this moment that Bob, who had been hovering nervously in the background, made a critical error. Carol, honey, maybe we should just drop this, he suggested weakly. Remember what happened with your grandfather when he thought the government was after him? All those conspiracy theories about the land seizure? Karen's shriek could have shattered aircraft glass. Robert, not another word. She spun on him with such fury that several officers instinctively reached for their weapons. The neighbors who had gathered to watch the spectacle were now very interested in whatever family secret Bob had almost revealed. Elena caught my eye and nodded knowingly, and I filed away this new information about land seizures and conspiracy theories for future reference. Karen quickly recovered, turning back to the officers with renewed determination. I'm confiscating this badge as evidence, she announced, making another grab for my credentials. I've already contacted the real Air Force about this imposter. Someone from the Pentagon, my cousin's friend's sister's boyfriend works there. They're very interested in fake military officers. Martinez, still holding my badge, pinched the bridge of his nose like he was fighting off a migraine. Ma'am, did you call the Pentagon? Karen's eyes lit up. Even better, I called the tip line for reporting military fraud. They'll be here tomorrow to arrest him. She waved her phone triumphantly, and I could see she'd already created an event page for tomorrow's confrontation with the title, Military Fraud Exposed, Pentagon Arrives. What Karen didn't understand in her Google-educated expertise on military law was that filing false complaints about military personnel creates a very specific, very trackable paper trail. Every crazy email, every bogus report, every live-streamed accusation was building a case, just not the one she thought. As the police finally left and the neighbors dispersed, I stood in my driveway looking at the woman who had turned my homecoming into a three-ring circus. She was still filming, still ranting about corruption and conspiracies, completely unaware that she was documenting her own upcoming encounter with actual military justice. See you tomorrow, fake colonel, she sneered, making air quotes around colonel. Your house of cards is about to collapse when the real Pentagon arrives. I nodded politely and went inside to finally unpack my gear. Let her have her meeting. Let her invite whatever confused Pentagon official she'd harassed into coming. Sometimes the best strategy is to let your opponent defeat themselves, and Karen was proving to be exceptionally good at that. Which federal agency do you think Karen actually called? Wrong answers only in the comments. Hint, it wasn't the Pentagon and they were definitely not happy about being dragged into this mess. Karen booked the community center's main hall for what she called the Military Fraud Tribunal, printing 300 agendas titled, Exposing the Fake Colonel, in bold red letters across the top. She'd rented professional camera equipment, determined to broadcast what she called, the most important live stream of our generation, to her 47 followers. I arrived 20 minutes after the scheduled start time to find a mostly empty room. 23 people had shown up out of the 300 Karen expected, and 18 of them were just there for the entertainment value. Bob sat in the back row, poorly concealing a flask while Elena had brought homemade popcorn that she was sharing with the Martinez family. The echo of Karen's voice bouncing off empty chairs would have been sad if it wasn't so fitting. Fellow patriots and concerned citizens, Karen began, clicking to the first slide of her PowerPoint presentation. Tonight we expose the truth about the military imposter living among us. Slide 1 showed my face with the title Marcus Reed, a study in deception, rendered in what appeared to be papyrus font. By slide 37, which featured a blurry photo of me checking my mailbox labeled, Suspicious Communication Patterns Possible Enemy Contact, people were openly laughing. Slide 89 was supposed to be more evidence but instead showed Karen's vacation photos from Branson, Missouri, which she frantically clicked past while muttering about technical difficulties. When she reached slide 134, a screenshot of the Air Force website with arrows pointing to absolutely nothing, even her 3 supporters looked confused. The meeting reached peak absurdity when Karen called for a formal vote on her motion to ban all fake military officers from our community, retroactively and in perpetuity. She raised her own hand enthusiastically, followed by her friend Nancy and one elderly gentleman who I think was just stretching. "All in favor?" she asked, her voice cracking slightly as she surveyed the sparse crowd. 3 hands. All opposed. 18 hands shot up, including Bob's, though he quickly lowered it when Karen's laser glare found him. "The system is rigged," Karen declared, her face flushing red. "You've all been compromised by military propaganda." Someone in the back muttered, "Or maybe we just have common sense," which earned them a death stare and a note in Karen's ever-present violation notebook. Later that evening, I was in my barn organizing the fishing equipment that had caused this morning's SWAT raid when I heard vehicles pulling up my driveway. Through the window, I saw 3 black SUVs with government plates and men in dark suits stepping out. My phone buzzed with a text from my commanding officer. "Marcus, heads up. Pentagon security is en route to your location. Some civilian has been filing reports claiming you're impersonating an Air Force colonel. This should be interesting." I walked outside to meet them and the lead agent flashed his credentials. "Colonel Reed? I'm Agent Harrison, Pentagon Security. We need to discuss the complaint situation." Behind him, Karen's face appeared in her window, and I could see her frantically setting up her camera equipment. She'd actually done it, she'd gotten the Pentagon involved. "Agent Harrison," I said calmly, "I assume this is about the harassment complaints I've been documenting against Mrs. Powell?" His eyebrows raised slightly. "Actually, sir, we're here because Mrs. Powell has filed 47 separate complaints with various federal agencies claiming you're impersonating a military officer. She's reported you to the FBI, CIA, NSA, and somehow even contacted the Coast Guard." I could see Karen in her window, practically vibrating with excitement as she started her live stream. "Breaking news. Pentagon agents have arrived to arrest the fake colonel. Justice is coming." Agent Harrison continued, "She's also been calling the Pentagon's fraud hotline daily for 2 weeks, claiming you're running some kind of illegal military operation on civilian property. She seems to believe you're either a foreign agent or selling classified weapons to ranchers." The absurdity was breathtaking. "Agent Harrison, I control military airspace for this entire region. I have clearance levels she couldn't pronounce. Would you like to see my actual credentials?" "Already verified, sir. That's why we're here." He held up a thick folder. "Mrs. Powell's complaints have triggered automatic investigations at 6 different agencies. The paperwork alone is costing taxpayers thousands of dollars." Karen had emerged from her house and was approaching with her camera, Bob trailing reluctantly behind her. "Officers," she called out, using the voice she reserved for her most dramatic livestream moments. "Thank goodness you're finally here. I have been documenting this military fraud for months." Agent Harrison turned to look at her with the expression of someone who deals with national security threats for a living and has just encountered a suburban conspiracy theorist. "Mrs. Powell, I presume?" "Yes. And I have extensive evidence of this man's criminal impersonation of military personnel." She thrust her manila folder at him like she was handing over state secrets. Agent Harrison opened the folder and began flipping through pages of printed conspiracy theories, blurry photos of me mowing my lawn, and what appeared to be a hand-drawn organizational chart connecting me to various imaginary government plots. "Ma'am," he said slowly, "are you aware that filing false reports about military personnel is a federal crime?" Karen's confidence flickered for just a moment. "False? These aren't false. I have proof. Mrs. Powell, Colonel Reed isn't impersonating anyone. He's a decorated Air Force officer with classified clearance levels. You've been harassing a real military officer and filing false federal complaints. But Karen wasn't ready to accept reality. That's exactly what they'd want you to believe. The corruption goes all the way to the top. Agent Harrison sighed and pulled out his phone. Mrs. Powell, I'm going to play you a recording from this morning's Pentagon briefing. A crisp military voice filled the air. Colonel Reed's classified operations in Israel have been exemplary. His work on joint airspace coordination has been vital to national security. Any harassment of Colonel Reed should be treated as a matter affecting military readiness. Karen's face went through several shades of pale as the reality began to sink in. Furthermore, Agent Harrison continued, your repeated false reports have triggered investigations that have diverted resources from actual national security matters. You're looking at federal charges for harassment of military personnel, filing false reports, and obstruction of federal operations. Bob finally found his voice. Carol, I told you this would happen. Just like when your grandfather... Shut up, Robert. Karen screamed, but the damage was done. Agent Harrison's interest was clearly piqued. What about her grandfather? Elena, who had been watching from her porch, walked over with the newspaper clipping still in her pocket. That family has been fighting imaginary government conspiracies for 70 years, she said, handing him the article about the poker game. Some people can't admit when they've been beaten fair and square. Agent Harrison read the clipping, then looked at Karen with something approaching pity. Mrs. Powell, you're under arrest for filing false federal reports, harassment of military personnel, and making threats against a classified military operation. As the handcuffs clicked into place, Karen looked around wildly, still unable to accept what was happening. This is impossible, she whispered. I researched everything. I followed all the clues. He can't be real. Mrs. Powell, I said quietly, I control the airspace above your house. Every airplane you've ever seen, every military aircraft, every emergency helicopter. I have the authority to clear or deny access to this entire region. You picked a fight with someone who literally controls the sky above your head. The weight of that revelation finally broke through her delusions. Karen looked up at the sky, then back at me, and for the first time in months she was completely speechless. Agent Harrison led her toward the SUV while Bob followed, telling the agents he'd testify to everything. Elena crossed herself and muttered a prayer in Spanish. As they drove away, Karen's phone was still propped up on her porch, live streaming to her 47 followers. The comment section was going wild. Plot twist of the century. This is better than Netflix. How do you fake arrest the Pentagon? 6 months later, I received a letter from federal prison with no return address. I recognized Karen's handwriting immediately, the same precise script that had annotated hundreds of violation notices. Colonel Reed, it read, you were right. I didn't know how to read the situation I was dealt. I spent my whole life fighting battles that existed only in my mind, clinging to lies because the truth was too painful. Thank you for the wake-up call. I'm learning new games now. Okay. Inside was a photograph that made me stop in my tracks. It showed Karen at what was clearly a group therapy session, holding a 6-month sobriety chip and standing next to a banner that read, admitting the problem is the first step. She looked healthier than I'd ever seen her, the manic energy replaced by something calmer, more grounded. Elena found me staring at the photo and read the letter over my shoulder. Do you think she's really changed? She asked. I tucked the letter away and shrugged. People can surprise you, Elena. Her grandfather couldn't admit he'd made a mistake, and it poisoned 3 generations. Maybe she's finally breaking the cycle. Later, someone mentioned seeing Karen working at a veteran support center 3 states away, helping other military families navigate their benefits. The ultimate irony, the woman who'd spent months trying to destroy a military family was now dedicating her life to helping them. As I closed my laptop after declining yet another request to discuss the HOA Karen vs. Air Force Colonel video that had somehow gone viral, I couldn't help but reflect on how sometimes the most satisfying victories aren't about winning at all. They're about everyone finding peace, even the people who tried to destroy yours. The military airspace I control has been here since the Air Force was founded, and it will outlast us all. But community, that's fragile. It takes trust, respect, and sometimes knowing when to fold a losing hand. Karen finally learned that lesson just 70 years and 1 viral arrest too late. Would you forgive a neighbor who tried to destroy your life if they genuinely changed? Comment below with your honest answer. And if you have your own HOA horror story, I read every single comment.